All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be doing our preview and prediction for the 2025 UCLA Bruins. Looking at this coaching staff, Deshaun Foster, second year as head coach, Tino Sunseri, first year in the role as offensive coordinator, Akia Malo has been on staff since 2022, will be the defensive coordinator. Pretty respectable offseason, top 50 high school class, 20th in the portal, 5-7 last year. They played really well too, Nick. Played a lot of close games. They were not a pushover one bit. Looking at this offense, of course, the biggest headline here is that they, went into the offseason with Joey Aguilar expected to be the starter, and instead they completed a de facto trade to get Nico Lamaleva, the ex-top-rated recruit, to come back out to Southern California, be their passer due to, some demands with him wanting more money from the University of Tennessee. Nonetheless, it works out in UCLA's favor. They're going to get this guy at least, I would think, for 2 years. Has a quick three-step drop, shows great velocity on throws to the boundary, quick throws on curls and comebacks. He can really throw it off platform or run with some good power in terms of throwing the football on the move. Has nice speed for his size of 6'5", 215, athletic player. Will he have lost the locker room before even getting a chance due to that fallout at Tennessee is kind of a question mark. And of course, he struggled to diagnose coverage and make quick reads last year. Also had 10 fumbles and struggled under pressure. It was his first year as a starter, Nick, so I think there's a lot of negatives here that are going to be worked out as time goes on. Biggest question mark here, though, is from a mentality standpoint. Does the locker room really like this guy, considering what they just saw happen, or do you think it's kind of a no-go for them? They don't really seem to care that much, and they're going to be glad to have this guy in there?
I think this was kind of a nice de facto trade between Tennessee and UCLA here, and I think UCLA comes out the potential winners. Nico showed some progress in his first year. Obviously still has a lot to do. A very tall quarterback in the pocket at 6'6", 220. From that area, Long Beach, California. You knew a lot about him before he ended up starting at Tennessee there. Lost the locker. That whole NIL issue, the whole dispute was very quick. I think it was right for Tennessee to cut bait and let him go. But he ends up at UCLA, and dare I say, I think it could work out really well. I think the pressure at UCLA will be a lot less than it was at Tennessee, a program that's looking for a national title, competing in the heavily competitive SEC. Not that the Big Ten's not competitive, but I think the pressure on UCLA is a lot less than it is at Tennessee, where that fan base will ride you pretty much the entire time. And if you make a mistake, they're not going to let you forget about it. I thought Nico was solid last year, 63% comp rate, 2,600 yards, 19 touchdowns, 5 picks, and 3 rushing touchdowns. He struggled in some of the bigger games, had a very bad game against Ohio State in the college football playoff, a 45% comp rate, struggled against Alabama in what was a win for Tennessee as well. In that matchup, didn't look phenomenal against Georgia in a game that they ended up losing as well. So I think this is a kid that still has tons of high upside potential. I think you can really do a lot with him here. I thought Aguilar was going to be solid for UCLA this upcoming season, but I think you have a guy that's got a high ceiling, high potential, a player that can develop into a true superstar, and the pressure will be less on him on the West Coast. He's more comfortable back home. He's got some NIL money as well from this deal. I think this will work out really well for UCLA, and I think he certainly elevates this offense to a level that was not expected when we were talking about this team in January.
Yeah, you look at the offensive numbers, they're pretty horrid at everything. I know they're playing from behind a lot, so Garbers was able to put them in top 50 in terms of pass yards per game. Now let's go ahead and look at some of these pass catchers. Kwasi Gilmer played a good bit as a freshman, pretty promising player. Played both inside and out, will certainly be the top target here. Titus Makeo Adamalala, he's the next leading returning pass catcher that was a starter. Had respectable production in nearly all games across the final 2 months. Mikey Matthews, a solid player, but hasn't had opportunities at his last 2 schools to really impress. I think he can be a big focal point in this offense. Jaden Wilson, another transfer, barely did anything in 4 years at Arkansas, though. Rico Flores only ended up playing the first 4 games of the season, but a guy I felt was going to be pretty solid for them. And he was in 2023 as well. I think he'll be a focal point in this group as an outside pass catcher, 6'2", 205. Tight end was their leading pass catching spot last season, so they're going to lean heavily on Jack Peterson and Hudson Harmel to try and replicate. Not a bad group here. I think there's enough weapons here for Nico to be successful, especially in the non-conference slate. Maybe some mid-tier conference opponents, Nick. I don't know how they'll do against the better opponents like Penn State's and Oregon's and all that, but I think this is a respectable group where they can improve through the air, and they will.
I think they will improve through the air. I like what they have here. I think this is a group overall that's not too bad. I think they made some solid moves here. Gilmer coming back. He was solid as a true freshman for this team last year, 345 and 2 scores for him. I thought he was really solid at that wide receiver X position. Atamalia as well was solid for them, 294 and 1 score. I think he'll certainly be a target. Rico Flores was not bad either in his 4 games before he took a red shirt, 187 that is, and 1 score for him, 15.6 yards to grab. Jack Pedersen, their traditional tight end, had 126 yards in a score. I think he'll be a solid tight end for them. I do like his potential high upside capabilities there. I think, they added Mikey Matthews, who didn't do a whole lot at Cal or Utah, but he had some solid reps at Cal on an occasion last year, ended up scoring a touchdown in the season opener, and also had 272 yards receiving total. So not only this is a bad room at all, I think this room has some solid depth and some high upside potential players.
Now we look at this rushing attack that was one of the worst in the country. I thought they had respectable runners, though. TJ Harden was a physical player. Keegan Jones, he didn't have a lot of production, but at times he was solid. Those guys are gone. Jalen Berger had one good year versus the season's back with Michigan State. Hasn't done much to impress since then. Only had 178 yards last year on a few touches. Anthony Frias, as a senior, didn't really see the field until the season finale against Fresno State. Anthony Woods, coveted player in the portal last year, didn't end up playing for Utah in 2024. He was a real standout for Idaho for 2 seasons before that, though, rushing for nearly 2,000 yards and 20 touchdowns. They also picked up Javian Thomas here late, who had a really good season for Cal, over 6 yards per carry as the lead back for them. Overall, below average room. Some promise, though. If Thomas and Woods can deliver, and I hope that they will, because I think those should be the top 2 rushers in this offense in terms of carries. They should improve, Nick. 131st, can't get worse than that. What do you make of this rushing attack? Is it favorable for you?
Yeah, can't get worse than 131st. 86.5 yards per game, below 100 yards per game is a very bad number. It was horrible last year. I think a lot of it does rely on the offensive line, which we'll talk about in a second as well. But I think they made some efforts adding Woods and Thomas. Woods was really good at Idaho in previous years. Wonder how he'll be after, considering he didn't play last year at all. But he's a guy I think is still a high upside prospect who was good at the FCS level. Thomas is probably the add of the portal cycle for the offense outside of Nico. I think Thomas was really good last year for Cal. 6.3 yards per attempt, 7 scores for him, also had 11 receptions, 626 for him. He'll certainly be involved in this offense. He'll be your number 1 back. I think he's a guy that's got a lot left in the tank. I think Berger was not bad at times. 178 obviously isn't phenomenal, plus the 3.7 yards per attempt is not really that impressive. He did have 2 receiving touchdowns, though, so they'll use him in the red zone when necessary. Look out to see what he looks like in the red zone this year. I like what this rushing attack could potentially do. I think they obviously can't get worse than they are right now, so they're going to slowly improve as time goes on. They made some decent moves. We'll see how it pans out.
Now you look at this offensive line for UCLA. This is a group that was quite poor last year, and it started with a revolving door at left tackle. We saw 4 different guys play between 150 and 270 snaps. Went to the portal to beef up this spot. Cortland Ford, a 6-year guy, started his career on the other side of town at USC. Spent the last 2 years at Kentucky. 6'6", 327, has only slightly over 1,000 snaps to his name. Katie Arnold from Jacksonville State, 6'7", 335, would have spent all of his 300-plus snaps in 2 years at right tackle, and he struggled in those appearances. Left guard is also up for grabs. Eugene Brooks didn't see the field in his freshman season at OU. He's 6'3", 336. He'll battle Olu Akashilo, who is also a unit, 6'5", 335. There's no playing time to his name either, though. Right guard, likely to be occupied by FSU import Julian Armella. He's a 325-pounder. Limited snaps in 2 years. The only 2 returning starters are going to be Sam Ewan at center, who was below average, and he struggled for the most part. And right tackle Garrett DiGiorgio, who was the best player on this unit. He was an exceptional pass blocker at 310 pounds. The offensive line's a work in progress. Being able to establish clear starters will certainly benefit them and allow them to get into some type of rhythm. A lot of inexperience across the board, Nick. A lot of guys that haven't panned out elsewhere, but the size is evident, and that's a great starting point.
The size is there, but this is a very weak offensive line. I'm not going to sugarcoat it here. I don't like this offensive line at all. I think it's weak. They brought in a couple different pieces here, but I question that. I think Armella from Florida down there, I think he's a really solid player from Florida State. Previously, bounced around other programs. I think he'll be really solid for this team at right guard. I think he could be really good. Cortland, Ford, he's a guy that could potentially be solid left tackle. I don't know what his high upside potential is. Brooks didn't play on a bad O-line at OU last year. Maybe he'll be good for this program. I don't know. I do think some of the size and some of the returners are good. I think Yoon could potentially develop. He was bad last year, but maybe he'll find a way to be better at center. I don't think this is a very good offensive line. I'm certainly concerned about it. I think that's part of the reason why this rushing attack was so weak last year. If this offensive line could find a way to improve, that rushing attack will improve as well, but I don't have high faith in this unit. I think it's a very weak unit for this conference.
Now you look at the verdict. The UCLA offense was poor for the most part last year. They showed signs of life at points throughout 2024, but now they go back to square one with the loss of numerous starters. I think the Bruins are very happy with the upside of this passing attack, as Nico is still an immense talent, and if given a fair chance from a personality standpoint coming into this locker room, they could make some things happen with this wide receiver group. Offensive line and run game will probably still be poor, so he's going to be airing it out a ton. I think they're going to be just fine with that. The run game will benefit, though, if they can stretch the field, Nick. So even though I'm giving them a C+, I'm excited for this offense. I really want to see what they can do because they're going to be underdogs in a lot of games, but they have that guy, Nico, who could be a great equalizer. And we have a 5-star under center. You can beat anybody in the country in college football, and that's a proven fact. So I think this will be a fun team to watch, Nick, even at a C+, because the ceiling's pretty high.
Yeah, I think this will be a fun team to watch. They're going to air the ball out a lot. They're going to throw it a ton. They'll certainly be a top 50 passing unit in the nation again. I think Nico certainly can elevate this offense. I think it was a great ad, and they really do benefit from the fact that he was having a messy relationship at Tennessee. So they end up being the ones that benefit, and I think it's a really solid benefit. This kid could be really good if he reaches that high upside potential that we know he has. I'm curious to see what it's going to look like when he gets on the field for UCLA and whether or not his confidence and whether or not the confidence around him exists. I think it does. I think they'll put it past him, and they'll let him go out there and play football, and I'm excited to see what it looks like. The O-line, the rushing attack is weak, but I think the Thomas ad from Cal was a really good one that could really certainly help out this unit. Curious to see what this offense looks like. I'll be keeping an eye on it. If Nico has a great season, though, things will be looking positive in the future for this offense. A C+ for now, but it can certainly elevate and grow as season goes on. Curious to see how this team develops.
And I think what you said about the fan base is certainly a big deal. It's completely different in Knoxville compared to Westwood, where they just don't really seem to care all that much. Moving to the defensive side of the ball, they added 15 guys in the portal for what was actually a really respectable unit last season that only gets back 2 starters. Up front, the defensive end group, Jacob Busick, a veteran player, had nearly 300 snaps last fall, but wasn't all that good. Only had 10 tackles. Devin Apu, a returning starter from the edge group, was even less effective. He struggled versus the run, but had slightly better production with 1.5 sacks, but both are going to need to be much better. Grant Bucky, a redshirt sophomore, didn't play last year, but he'll be a key rotational piece, as well Nico Dalviller, who was actually a pretty good run defender, might be the best player in this group. Interior defensive line returns Ciel Tuapaki, who was a lackluster player in nearly 300 snaps. Keanu Williams, 6'5", 310, though, is expected to step into a bigger role after playing in only 2 games last year. He was not that bad for them in extended reps back in 2023. I love the return of Gary Smith. Missed all of last year. That was certainly major for him. He's been a great run stopper his entire career. Started back with Duke in 2022. In 2022 and 3, he was with the Bruins, and he was great, but he did start his career earlier than that at Duke. So I think this is a respectable unit, Nick. They also picked up a 295-pounder in Ashton Sanders from Oklahoma, limited action in 2 years. AJ Fialmano, a 310-pounder. Wasn't all that good, but he also got on the field a good bit in rotation. This is a quality group. I think they have nice size and rotation on the interior. I think the pass rush won't do them any favors, but I think they'll be good against the run once again.
They'll be solid against the run, but this is still a weaker unit. I think it's definitely a weaker unit on this team, and I worry about this defense. Tuapaki is a solid player that comes back, 23 total tackles and a sack for him last year. He'll certainly have to bring up a lot of the load. Devin Apu was okay as well for them, 15 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Not bad numbers there. Jacob Busick was not good for this team, 10 tackles for him and 1 sack, although he's got to certainly be better this year. Curious to see what he can do. Grant Buckley, maybe he could finally find a way to break out a little bit here. Keanu Williams, same deal with that. 2 guys that haven't played a whole lot for this program. Potentially one of the ads there, Ashton Sanders, I think could be a solid ad, a guy that maybe could potentially be involved, as could Bennett, who was a guy that's been around college football for a while here. Definitely a unit that maybe has some potential, but I think it's certainly a low potential unit here. They replace a lot of different players. The interior defensive line is strong, but I think the pass rush worries me a little bit there. I mix it up a little bit. The pass rush is what I'm worried about. The interior defensive line is good. I like the size there with Williams and Tuapaki. I think they'll both be strong against the run.
Now I move to the middle of this defense. At the linebacker group, Jalen Woods was pretty good for them last year. Saw 200 snaps on the year, was a quality player versus the run. Only missed 2 tackles. He's going to step into a starting role this fall alongside a veteran, JoJo Vaughn, who in 5 years hasn't been all that good for this program, though. Ty Lee, an ex-defensive back, will be moving down to linebacker full-time, it appears. Was only 210 pounds last year, so we'll need to keep adding to his frame as he's pretty undersized. Added Isaiah Chisholm from Oregon State, who was really good across the back half of the season as a starter, should fill a void, but he's also undersized. He was 218 pounds on last year's roster for the Beavs. We'll check again once the fall roster is posted, of course, and check these weights. But if they stay where they're at, and this group is, they're going to get outclassed physically, Nick, because they have some guys who are undersized. Depth isn't all that great. Poor linebacking group across the board. Coaching did prove last year with Schwarzinger that they can make something out of nothing. So he ended up going 2nd round in the draft, Nick, after I think he was a walk-on, that being Carson Schwarzinger. So I think this is a respectable group. If those guys add that weight, I think Chisholm from Oregon State could be a good player. But if we don't add up to our frames, they're going to get demolished.
Yeah, it's certainly a weaker unit. They got to find a way to bulk up here. I think Woods is solid, 22 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, and 3 QB hurries last year. He's going to have an increased role here, a guy from Southern California that could be solid. JoJo Vaughns was okay in his 4 games at times, but limited reps there, only had 4 tackles in those 4 games, had a tackle for loss. Curious to see what his production looks like here. I think Chisholm was not a bad ad from Oregon State if he can really get up to size there. He had 75 total tackles and 5 tackles for loss for them last year, plus 2 QB hurries. Maybe he's a guy you rely on there, a younger player that can certainly develop.
I move to the back end of this defense. Looking at the secondary, the corner group is heavily built to transfers. Andre Jordan from Oregon State was a quality starter last season. Only allowed over 50 yards in game twice last fall. Scooter Jackson was a really good starter in coverage for Utah Tech. He was a poor tackler, though. Love the addition of Jameer Johnson from Indiana. I like his coverage abilities. He did struggle versus the run and to be a consistently efficient tackler, though. Added Robert Stafford from Miami and Aaron Williams from Louisville. Both barely played in their lone year in the ACC. Kanye Clark, the only returnee from last year's roster. He only saw 2 games, though. Slot gets good transfers from Louisville. And Benjamin Perry played a versatile role, mainly in the slot for the Cards. Safety group added 2 notable veterans. Key Lawrence was a good run stopper and was solid in coverage in his career for Oklahoma. Didn't play much for Ole Miss last year, so he transfers out to be a starter for the Bruins. And, of course, Byron Threat from UCF started his career at Cincinnati. Has a good amount of reps under his name in his career. Croc Stewart played about 80 snaps last fall, but he was uneventful. Then you have Zeke Thomas, a senior, who himself has never saw the field in his career. I like what they have across the board here due to the portal ads at corner, quality safety group. I think they might struggle in coverage, but do well, I feel, against the run, that being the safeties. Quality group here, Nick. A couple years ago I was pretty high in their secondary, and they balled out completely. Of course, Deonton Lynn's not the DC anymore, but I think they still kind of have that essence in their system due to the defensive coordinator being around for a couple of years. So I think the secondary will be just fine.
Quality group here. I think they made a lot of moves. A new look group of a lot of different guys. They really only brought back Stewart and Clark. Clark, was okay for them last year. Stewart was solid, and his reps, 12 total tackles for him. Curious to see what his workload looks like this year, but it's all about transfers here. A lot of different guys. I'll start with Andre Jordan. I think it was a solid ad, also from Oregon State, similar to their linebacker. 27 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 4 pass breakups. He's a guy I think will be good in coverage there. Not a bad ad. Key Lawrence, I think, is a really solid ad. He was good in 2023. Didn't play last year, but he had 44 total tackles and 3 pass breakups in 2023 plus 2 picks. If he can play to that level again, he's solid. He's been at 3 SEC programs. He's bounced around a while. Cole Martin from Arizona State is not a terrible player. Didn't do a whole lot last year. Did have a solid career at Oregon prior to that with 21 total tackles. In his young career, I think he'll be solid for this team. And then Ben Perry had 29 total tackles last year for Louisville, 2.5 sacks. Also had 56 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, and 4 pass breakups in 2023 for the Cardinals. I think that's a really solid ad. I think Perry will certainly be involved and be good for this team in the slot. This is a unit that I think can certainly develop here. I'm high on the secondary. I think the secondary is one of the better parts of this team. A new look secondary, a lot of new faces, which I don't love necessarily, but I think they made some solid ads, added some guys with good SEC and ACC experience. Not a bad unit at all.
Now look at the defensive verdict. The Bruins D did exactly what I expected last year, and that was to be strong versus the run and overall play tough ball. And that same thing should be in store for 2025 behind a nice interior D line, a nice corner group that should be competitive. But the pass rush, the linebacking core, and the safety group pop out as some glaring holes, and I think it's going to overall lead to regression. So this will be a tough defense, I think, for most opponents. A B- here for now, Nick. And again, they will be tough against the run. They were top 10 last year in that category, a legitimate run defense, and they also had a couple of linebackers help provide a lot of production. Those guys are gone now, so I'm hopeful for this defense, but those are some glaring holes that are holding me back from being too hopeful.
Phenomenal against the run last year, right? Number 6 in the nation, 96 yards per game, given up on the ground. A really strong unit. I think they'll be good against the run this year. Interior defensive line is good. The secondary, I think, solid as well. This is a B- unit. I think they've added some solid pieces. I do like some of the newcomers. They brought in some guys like Chisholm, I think, would be really solid, and Benjamin Perry. Some of the returning players are okay. They do lose a lot at linebackers, so I'm certainly worried about that unit. I don't think this is a unit that jumps off the page at you. Just a middle-of-the-road defense that should be solid in most games, but will struggle against some of those tougher opponents.
Looking at the schedule and the prediction for UCLA, the personal feelings around Nico are certainly warranted, but when we suit up and hit the gridiron, the only thing that matters is skill, and I think he's going to impress in that area of a pass-catching group that's going to be quite solid. This team will be heavily oriented around the pass game, and I think they have a defense that will be able to gut it out on most Saturdays due to a big, deep interior defensive line. This team never got blown out outside of the Indiana game last year, and I think you see them be quite competitive for the most part. Annoying schedule, right, is they don't have a single set of back-to-backs either at home or on the road, so we're traveling all over the place like crazy. And maybe I'm being way too hopeful for a team that has plenty of glaring needs, but considering how tough they played last year and now throwing an X5 star quarterback in to run their offense, you can easily have him be a difference maker in the results, Nick. I think as they're going to be 3 or 4 point underdogs currently against Utah in the season opener at home. Seems like a game that no one's going to give the Bruins a chance in. It just feels like that's how it's going to be because a lot of people are probably going to expect a bounce back year for the Utes. I think they win that game at home. I think they start off the year quite strong at 4-0. I think they can beat Penn State. That was the biggest trap game on our Nittany Lions podcast. And I think they can beat Michigan State as well. And then I have them beating Maryland, Nick. So they can start off on a nice little run. Are they that good to win that many games in a row to start the year? Maybe not. This will be a pretty darn good football team, Nick. 6-6 for me. They're going to knock somebody off, either Washington, Penn State, or UCLA, or USC, that is, sorry, to make a bowl game if they don't beat Utah. But I think this is a pretty quality team, Nick. I'm going to enjoy watching them this year.
Yeah, I think this is a quality team. Obviously, there's a ton of intrigue around the Nico situation. I think a lot of people are going to want to watch that and see how it unfolds. I think it's something to keep an eye on, and really the big winners potentially if he turns out to be the star that we think he can be. If it's a bust, though, obviously, I think it's a high potential, low risk move there. I kind of screwed that saying up, but a low risk, high reward move is what I meant to say. I think it's a low risk move here, bringing a guy in that had this issues at Tennessee because I think he has such high flying potential that he could really be solid for this team. I think they beat Utah as well on August 30th. I think Utah is just a team that a lot of people are high on because their previous pedigree, but I think it's still a weaker team in the Big 12 in terms of middle of the pack in that conference. So I think UCLA will find a way to beat them at home. The trip to UNLV and week 2, Dan Mullen obviously getting things started out there in Vegas and Sin City. I'm curious to see what his kind of offense is going to look like, what his defense will look like as well there. I think Mullen will be a great hire, but I do think they win that game in Vegas, although the fan presence should be interesting as well. Not that far away from Las Vegas is Los Angeles. I think they win the rest of the non-conference, aka against New Mexico, and beat Northwestern. I think they're going to lose to Nebraska. That's the one that I have different from you. I think Nebraska is just a very talented team, and Dylan Raiola will find a way to win that game and get the job done here. Tough schedule, certainly, but I wouldn't be surprised they find a way to upset Michigan State, Ohio State, or USC on the road, maybe even get Washington at home later in the season. I do think there is some positive with this team, but I just think overall it's a weaker squad in the Big Ten, so I'm not as high on them. 5-7 for me, although I do think with Nico at the helm, things could develop positively. This team will score a lot of points probably through the air. Want to see how that develops as well. The defense, I think, will be good against the run, but I just think they're missing some of those key players and key positions there to make this team actually a contender for a bowl game.
Yeah, I went ahead and pulled the trigger on an upset over Nebraska, who I have being undefeated up until that point, Nick, so that'd be a major victory in their season. I just think they're going to catch somebody off guard. Traveling out West Coast is kind of irritating. They beat Nebraska last year at home, gave them, hell on defense. And, of course, it's easier travel for Nebraska. But I think it's going to be a pretty quality team. They're going to beat somebody they shouldn't. And, Nick, just speak to the travel real quick, because I mentioned it a minute ago, but their schedule is just irritating if you're a player or a coach because, again, there's no back-to-backs that are favorable one bit.
No, there is none. It's a very brutal schedule when you think about it. I think they benefit from the fact they have no crazy East Coast road trips, right? They get Maryland and Penn State at home. Those are tough trips out from the West Coast to the East. They don't have to play Rutgers or Maryland or Penn State in the eastern part of the United States, but they do have to travel to Northwestern and Michigan State, as well as Indiana and Ohio State. Those are all tougher trips from the West Coast. It's got to be annoying, right? There's no rhythm there. You're kind of bouncing back and forth between places. Even a trip to UNLV, you still got to do that earlier in the season. So I would certainly be unhappy if I was a player or a coach on this team, because that's just tough on you. It's tough for these programs in the Big Ten and on the West Coast. I think that was unthought about when we were doing this expansion here. Some of those travels are just tough on these young athletes, and I certainly do feel for them.
Yeah, I mean, the first 3 weeks is pretty simple. 2 home games, and then Vegas is about 4 hours. But after that, man, it's really brutal on you. So, that's it for today's episode. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.